What is up, everyone? Sergeant Ergebert here, and today we're reacting to the 5th part. Oh, there's another part after this, okay. Well, apparently this is supposed to be about, Prussia versus France. To continue from the last part, which is part 4.
Hey folks, before we start, allow me to introduce our newest extra history artist, Nick. He'll be taking over for David, who is now hard at work on our new extra sci-fi series. Say hello.
Hello, Nick.
Any increase in power brings an increase in enemies. But to Bismarck, enemies were as useful as friends. With the defeat of Austria and the consolidation of the northern German states into one hegemony ruled by Prussia.
Yeah, I didn't really mention that last video, but there was like a new country formed called the North German Confederation.
Bismarck's eye turned to the next problem, founding Germany.
Wait a minute.
Germany ruled by Prussia.
By the way, I want to make it,
and the consolidation.
I want to make it clear that this little area is not part of Prussia or Germany at the time. That was still part of France. That wasn't its own state, as it's shown here. So yeah.
Of the northern German states into one hegemony ruled by Prussia, Bismarck's eye turned to the next problem, founding Germany. But to do this, he would need to bring all of the southern German states under his control. He knew he couldn't simply annex them by force. He needed a unified Germany, a Germany that felt like a country, not some occupied territory under a foreign rule.
Jeez.
And for that, the southern German states would have to come to him willingly, of their own volition. But they had always been aligned with Austria, so how could he get them to volunteer to be absorbed into Prussia? He would need
common enemy,
an external threat, something that would make these states more afraid of other nations, and see Prussia as the benevolent protector and cultural brother that they could turn to in their time of need. And what better enemy than France?
Yeah, what better enemy than France?
Napoleon III, who had been willing to stand by and let Prussia pick off its neighbors back when it was a minor power, suddenly woke up and realized that a power to rival France had just emerged on its border. Yeah. Already upset about the fact that he hadn't gotten any territory as a bribe for staying neutral in the war. But
yeah, like Prussia said, hey, I'm going to give you some land. But they never actually did, so yeah. And it was in the war against Denmark, I think.
Between Prussians and Austrians, Napoleon was primed and ready for a conflict neutral in the war between Prussians and Austrians. Napoleon was primed and ready for a conflict with Prussia. But there was a problem. Both Prussia and France needed the other one to be the aggressor. Neither wanted to risk international rebuke or the possibility of foreign intervention in their cause. But Bismarck had a plan. Bismarck always had a plan. His plan was wait until circumstances presented themselves that allowed him to formulate an advantageous plan.
Okay, I guess that works.
So he did. Then, when the Queen of Spain was suddenly kicked out of Spain by revolutionaries, Bismarck knew it was go time. Because when a European monarch vacates their throne, there is always a multinational scramble for succession.
Yeah.
In this case, you'd think it would be less.
Like, there are so many wars, like literal, like giant wars that happen because of stuff like this.
Complicated because the Spanish kicked out their monarch and were essentially choosing a new one for themselves instead of trying to untangle and war over some Byzantine genealogical tree. But no, they instead decided to offer the crown of Spain to a German prince. Bismarck was all for this. He pushed for Prince Leopold to accept the offer, despite the fact that his name didn't even have Wilhelm in it anywhere. He knew full well that Napoleon III would have to rage against this offer.
Yeah.
After all, if Spain ever allied...
Yeah, because Spain and Prussia, they're like on this side and this side, so they just would completely corner France. So, really, it's a win-win. If France doesn't do anything, then they're pretty much cornered, and they have a cool alliance with Spain. But if France does intervene and doesn't like it, then they get themselves a war. So it works either way.
Allied with Prussia, which would be far more likely with a Prussian prince on the Spanish throne, France would be surrounded. King Wilhelm was against this, and even Prince Leopold didn't see great prospects in being king of a country that had spent most of the last century in revolt, but Bismarck's diplomacy prevailed, and the offer was accepted. All of these dealings were kept a very close secret, though.
I just realized something. They have like little letter name tags. You know, N for Napoleon, O for Otto von Bismarck, and then L for Leopold. That's interesting.
France found out too early the consequences could be disastrous. What Bismarck needed was for Leopold to be proclaimed king by the legitimate assembly of the people of Spain before Napoleon could make a move. That way, if France declared war over it, the world would see them as the aggressors. Everything went perfectly. On June 19th, 1870, Leopold agreed to accept the throne.
Dang.
2 days later, he sent a coded telegraph to...
This is very cool. This works very... Wait a minute. Wait, this map is wrong! No! Okay. Hold on. I want to make it clear that there's a, like, mediocre-sized country right here. Portugal. And it shows Spain having the entire Iberian Peninsula. What the heck?
Madrid, saying that he would arrive around the 29th. But then history turned, as it so often does, on a small thing. A cipher clerk made an error in decoding the message and wrote the 9th of July. The Spanish legislature couldn't be held in session that long, and thus was dismissed on June 23rd, which meant that when Leopold arrived in Spain, there was nobody present to make him king. People started noticing this Prussian prince kicking around in Madrid fairly quickly, and word reached the French papers. Soon, all of France was up in arms. So, not everything went perfectly. But Bismarck now played the spider, waiting silently. He knew that he couldn't be seen directing affairs. All he had to do was wait for the French to offer some insult, and then pounce on that to have the war he wanted.
Wait, how does that work? Oh no, France said mean things about me. I'm going to declare war.
But he didn't factor in Wilhelm. The king had always been opposed to the prince running off and taking the Spanish throne.
Oh yeah, look, W for Wilhelm.
So when the French outcry flared up, the Prussian monarch put his foot down and told Leopold to withdraw his nomination. This was a huge diplomatic win for France.
How dare you, France? Why do they have legs and hands, by the way?
But like always, Napoleon III pushed it too far. He sent a diplomat to ask Wilhelm to swear that no Hohenzollern would ever sit on the Spanish throne. The king found this mildly insulting, as there was no way he would promise something like that in perpetuity. And besides, he had already pulled Leopold from the throne, and it wasn't likely to come up again. He felt that he had already been perfectly reasonable about this. So he replied that he could promise no such thing, and sent the French ambassador away. Then he had a quick telegram sent to Bismarck relaying the incident and granting him permission to inform the press.
This is opportunity.
But Bismarck always had a way with vague instructions, and with words. He did indeed inform the press, but the message he passed along to them was carefully edited. It wasn't false, per se. It wasn't even really a misrepresentation. He just omitted some words. Omitted some words in such a brilliant way that when the German people read it, they would think the French ambassador had insulted their king. And when the French read it, they would think that the Prussian king had insulted their...
Is a war really going to start because they thought they insulted each other? Are you kidding me right now? It seems so dumb. Oh my gosh.
That did the trick. The people were up in arms, and the French were ticked. Paris all the more so, because, coincidentally, the telegram happened to come out on Bastille Day. And Napoleon III...
Wait, what's Bastille Day?
...needed a war. His regime was largely unsuccessful, and his foreign entanglement...
Okay, so apparently it's on July 14th, and it's like the French national holiday. And it's not just in France, it's in, like, I guess, all French countries, I guess. So I guess that includes Switzerland and Belgium? I don't know.
Had been a disaster
what did you say?
His regime happened to come out on Bastille Day, and Napoleon III needed a war. His regime was largely unsuccessful, and his foreign entanglements had been a disaster. He thought that if he could crush Prussia and gain territory for France, he would be back on stable footing. Soon, hundreds of thousands of French troops...
France doesn't look like that! What the hell? Okay. Belgium is an independent country, and they have, like, all of that land. And so is Luxembourg, and they have, like, a little bit of that land. Prussia does not border France, I'm pretty sure. No, they do. Oh my god! They have the map wrong in, like, a lot of ways. Okay. First of all, I'm just gonna try to ignore this area. Why is there water there? What the heck? Okay. Italy is supposed to have that land. That piece of land right here where my mouse is, like that little area is part of France. That's basically the state. It's basically Alsace and a little part of Lorraine. Yeah, Prussia, they do border France on this tiny little area right here. And the South German states, they were sort of with Prussia, I guess, in the war. And they're the ones who shared this larger border with France. So, yeah.
Were pouring across the Prussian border. Bismarck had his defensive war. The French had invaded, and he had the moral high ground. In response, the southern...
But will you have the military high ground?
German states flocked to the Prussian banner, but he played a dangerous game. By letting the French invade the Prussians, he had allowed them to mobilize first. Now the German army had to get into position before their country was overrun. But here, Bismarck had the greatest weapon, Moltke.
Oh, whatever, same thing.
The French had better rifles than the Germans, but the Germans had better ideas about modern war. Prussian observers had studied the American Civil War and knew that a train schedule could be as powerful a tool as any gun. Moltke embraced the idea of the railroad and the telegraph, with coordination.
Yeah, again, like I said in the last episode, it's like they're sort of laying the groundwork for, like, a fast-paced warfare. With, like, you know what I mean, like modern warfare. It's very cool.
Nation and these new technologies for movement. He not only got the German army to the front in time, he got more men there than the French did.
Dang.
But he did more than just this. He rewrote the rules so that German units no longer simply marched in great columns and fought in great lines, but rather acted as small units less susceptible to fire.
Wow.
Pushed the idea that since piercing the center of an army was no longer as much of a concern due to the deadly nature of modern rifles.
Yeah, and this is the thing. The whole reason why people marched in those, like, lines and columns was so they could shoot in giant big lines. So that way, because the rifles were really inaccurate. So their logic was basically, if we all shoot at the same time in this massive line, we're bound to hit a few people, right? So at this point, they're noticing that, hey, the rifles aren't really as accurate anymore. There's not as much of a need to march in giant lines. Now that, the rifles are completely different than they were, like, 100 years ago.
They should worry less about artillery getting overrun and more about how effective it was in a fight. So he moved his artillery closer to the action and had them working in conjunction with his units. He had a general staff, the only one in Europe, whose sole purpose was to draw up war plans in peacetime and
that is interesting.
Think through all of the probable scenarios of coming conflicts. With these advantages and the superiority in numbers, Moltke immediately took the offensive, rapidly pushing the French back across the border and charging into French territory. Time and again, the French reeled before the Prussian forces. Soon the French armies were falling back, trying to link up with reserves further down the line. But the retreating army was spotted by a small cavalry brigade, and nearby Prussian forces were ordered to move in and cut them off. Unfortunately, due to some wild miscalculations by both sides, the Prussians had just sent 30,000 men to engage what turned out to be 130,000.
Oh no!
The French were beleaguered and demoralized, but had an overwhelming advantage in men. The Prussians were ready for the fight, but ended up pinned by the French artillery. The Prussians were ready for the fight, but ended up pinned by the French artillery. In Operations, the Prussian commander sent a message to a nearby cavalry commander saying that the artillery must be cleared. Famously, the cavalry commander said, "It will cost what it will cost," and readied his men. Obscured by the terrain, they burst through the cannon smoke at the last minute, bearing down on the foe, giving them only 1,000 meters to react.
How come zebras aren't a type of horse? Isn't that weird?
The cavalry crashed into the artillery and tore through it, silencing the batteries that had so long hampered the Prussian army. This is so arguably the last cavalry charge to significantly change the course of a battle in modern military history. But even 1,000 meters is a long ride when you've got modern guns firing at you. Of the 800 horsemen who set out, only 420 made it back.
420, yeah. Oh, but seriously, that's very bad. Seriously, like only about half of them were just cut down.
And it turns out that Bismarck's son was among this regiment. It was late in the night of August 16, 1870, when a messenger arrived to tell Bismarck his eldest son was dead. Quartered only 20 miles away from the battlefield, Bismarck rode like a man possessed to find the body of his son, only to be greeted by his very much alive son laughing and joking in a farmhouse nearby. He had taken a bullet to the leg and would be out of the fighting, but was in no mortal danger. After a few more hard-fought victories, the Prussian forces bottled up the French at Metz and forced...
Yeah, I think at this stage of the war, what they did, they just completely encircled and then, like, so many troops. And yeah, in Metz. And one of the people was actually Napoleon III, the leader of France. So it was very good for them.
The surrender of 140,000 men. The French only had one army left to them, an army battered by an attempt to relieve the forces at Metz. But Moltke had no intention of letting this force get away, and in the days following the surrender at Metz, he maneuvered his forces and encircled this final army. A breakout attempt was made, but so exhausted and undersupplied were the French at this point, it soon became clear that a breakout was impossible. By the next day, 100,000 men, and with them the greatest prize of all, Napoleon III, who was personally leading this army, surrendered. France no longer had a real army on the field. Now it was time to think about the future.
They don't even have an army? What? That is incredible! Germany just went circles around them. Wow.
Bismarck, that meant peace terms. For Moltke, that meant pushing on to Paris.
No army, they've got this. They can push in any city they want. Wow. Thank you very much for watching. That was a great episode. And look, another Bismarck thing. But seriously, yeah, tomorrow we get to watch another episode, episode 6, which is titled Germany. So maybe that means it'll be the last, where Germany is finally formed. Yes, thank you so much for watching. Hello everyone, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell thingy. And if you didn't, then make sure to leave a thumbs down. But yeah, that would be greatly appreciated. And while you're at it, go ahead and watch my other videos. They're probably just as good, then if not better than this one right now. Except for my oldest videos, don't watch those. And, subscribe to these people down here, my fellow sergeants. They're other YouTubers that I either know or I have in high regards. Yeah, even my cat agrees. So, thank you for watching, and have a great day.